17 seconds and counting. 15, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, start, 2, 1, booster ignition, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery, returning to the space station, paving the way for future missions to beyond.
I am Dr. Rhea Seddon. I had the pleasure of being a surgeon first, and then an astronaut, and then an author. So I've had several careers, most interesting ones.
Absolutely. And could you tell the kids what were some of the things that you were interested in when you were growing up?
Well, you know, I watched Sputnik, the Russian satellite, fly over when I was 10. So that's when I got interested in the space program, and thought, well, they don't take women, and you know, I'm kind of little, so they're probably not ever going to take me. But I got interested in biology in high school. You know, when nobody else wanted to dissect the frog, I thought that was just the coolest thing, to be able to look inside somebody. So then I, of course, got interested in perhaps going into medicine. And so I went to medical school and did a residency there. And so it was a progression of interests that led to other things. I'd always hoped to fly in space, and what I ended up doing was doing life sciences research in space. So it all kind of begins to flow together as a life stream. So I've been very lucky, very fortunate, and I've loved everything that I do.
And we thank you for sharing that with us today. Do you mind if we just jump right into some student questions, and I'll also try and tie it to some of the lessons that they've been learning. So we will go with Mev. She is in Italy and she has an awesome question. Mev, you should be able to unmute to ask Dr. Seddon your question.
Hello, nice to meet you. I would like to know if you could describe your first journey into the space, telling us about your emotions, feelings, and your mental and physical preparation.
Well, buongiorno. And, you know, I had trained for so long to go into space, and I was a little anxious about it. I knew that there was a risk to that. But, you know, you have to look at things as what's the benefit and what's the risk? And I felt like the benefit would be to learn more about the human adaptation to space, which was my particular interest. And of course, it was very, very exciting when I finally got my first flight. The boosters ignited, and 8.5 minutes later, I was in space. So it was an awesome journey, and very strange, but very exciting.
That's awesome. And I can't imagine how exciting that would be. We have another question regarding your journeys, and this is from Tom, and he is in Germany. He's a high school student in Germany. Tom, you should be able to ask.
Yes, I'm very pleased to be here. What is training like for an astronaut?
Well, there was a good bit of training. We spent 2 years in training before we ever were assigned to flights. We had to learn all about the space shuttle, how it was flown, how the electrical power operated, how the boosters and the engines operated, where all the switches and computers and things were on board. We had to learn that pretty much in the classroom and in some of the simulators. We had to do rather unusual things, like in case we had to land, you know, in the jungle somewhere, you know, how would we survive? We had to learn all about geology and geography and oceanography so we could take good pictures and recognize unusual things on Earth. Everyone had to do scuba training because if you were assigned to do a spacewalk, the training was done in the water and in a huge water tank. And if your helmet flooded, a scuba diver had to come over and give you a mouthpiece to breathe on. So there were many unusual things that I would have never thought was part of our training, but it was. And everything that NASA could think of that we would need to do, how to handle failures on board the shuttle, how to do spacewalks. I never did get to do one of those, but there was very much in the first couple of years of training. And then when you're assigned to a flight, you learn about the specifics of that flight.
And for more information about Dr. Seddon, we have that in the chat, and we're going to also embed that in the video. Her website is astronaut.rheaseddon.com. We have a really good question from Jimena, and she is in Spain. And Jimena, you should be able to unmute to ask Dr. Seddon your question. It was a good one.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hello, I'm Jimena from Madrid, and I would like to ask that what was the thing that impressed you most on your first journey?
I think the thing that was so unforgettable for me was then, of course, you know, you launch and 8.5 minutes later, you're in orbit and you're weightless. If you unstrap your seatbelt, you float wherever you want to go. And that is something that we cannot simulate very well on the ground. So you have to get used to moving around like that. And one of the interesting things, immediately after I unstrapped when we got to orbit, I had to make some computer inputs, and I went to the keyboard and began to type, and I went that way because there was nothing holding me in place. And so that was one of the interesting and fun things that I got to do that we had no way of simulating on the ground. So you had to learn from your experiences up there exactly how to handle that. But it was lots and lots of fun.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of questions from the kids about what is that like, specifically the weightlessness, but more on the instructional side. Carla, and she's also in Spain, and she had a pretty good question because she's interested in science as well. Carla, you should be able to unmute to ask.
Hi, I'm Carla, and I want to know what would you recommend to students that are interested in science for the future?
Well, I think there are many things that you could study for science in the future, but you have to find something that you're particularly interested in. People ask me, what kind of background do you have to have to be an astronaut? And for us, it was science, technology, medicine. But, you know, there are a variety of things that are connected to that. And so we had lots of people with differing backgrounds, particularly if NASA had made plans, for instance, to have a radar telescope on board that was looking at the Earth for some reason. So it really, we looked for people that had those kinds of backgrounds when we initially came in, and over time, NASA began to take people with all kinds of science backgrounds. But the most important thing was that someone was really, really knowledgeable about the background of science that they studied. For me, of course, they were interested in the fact that I had gone to medical school, I had done a surgery residency, I had studied nutrition. So there were a number of things that were linked to my primary science. But I think the more you can fit all the pieces of your science together, the more interesting it is, and the more likely that you are to go into space someday.
Well put. And maybe like a little bit of background, like a follow-up question. In 1978, you being chosen to be the first astronaut class to include women, what was that experience like? You're literally like a trailblazer, and like, what was that like?
It was pretty awesome. There were 6 women in a class of 35. Most of the others were pilots. I guess I was more or less used to being in a world of men because I had done a surgery residency, and there were very, very few women in medical school back then, and even fewer who were accepted to a surgery residency. So I think, if you're one woman in a rather large group of men, you have to accommodate to that. You have to be a good sport when they tease you. You have to be able to take a joke. You have to be able to be perhaps a little better than some of the men just because you needed to prove yourself. So there are a number of things that went into being the first woman in the NASA program. It was very interesting. It's where I met my husband. So, a lot of really good people, just wonderful people that I don't think I could ever find a group like that again.
And those of you who are interested in learning more about Dr. Seddon's book, it's on our website. It's Go for Orbit, and I highly recommend it. We have a few more questions, and we'll let you go. We don't want to keep you too long. But Malo in France has a pretty good question. Malo, you should be able to ask.
Nice to meet you. Well, my question is, I wanted to know in STS 58. What was the purpose of your job as a payload commander?
Oh, I was a payload commander. It was one of my first real leadership positions, and I had to coordinate the crew activities with the on the ground activities, mission control, with the scientists. We had to essentially put that mission together. There were a lot of proposals from scientists all over the world to do those experiments, and we had to figure out how we could do the best of them in the time allotted. We had to coordinate with, for instance, NASA had rules about how many hours we should get off for sleep and when our meals would be, and there were a lot of managers that needed to coordinate with us, a lot of people in mission control. We practiced with mission control ahead of time because they were keeping an eye on us and answering questions and monitoring systems. So we had to, I had to coordinate all of that. And it was the first time that I think I really realized how many people it took to put a space shuttle mission together. And we had science proposals from people all over the world, the payloads people, they were called. And of course, they had a lot of input into things and the way they wanted things done. So it was a giant coordination problem, I guess, or a way of doing things. And I was kind of in the middle of everything. I had to keep everybody happy. But I learned a great, great deal from that experience.
It's wonderful. And we can't thank you enough for sharing that with us. We have a question from Oksana. She's from Russia. Oksana, you should be able to unmute to ask Dr. Seddon your question.
Hi, my name is Oksana, and my question is that does everything we find on the Earth exist in space, and can all people live there?
Sorry, you'll have to repeat it for me, Ralph.
She wanted to know if they think it's possible that life could exist somehow out in space, like humans. Could humans live out in space?
I think so. It's the realm of science fiction to a certain extent now, but we certainly have a space station where people stay for up to a year. I think NASA is planning on putting people in orbit around the moon and then putting a habitat on the moon. And then the future, of course, is perhaps going to Mars. Oksana, I have to tell you that my husband did the first docking with the Russian space station. They docked the space shuttle to the Russian space station, Mir. And the most difficult part of that flight for my husband, besides having to get a great, huge space shuttle up real close to a great, huge space station, he had to learn to speak Russian, and he still remembers a great deal of it. If he was near, he would be able to say something to you in Russian. He's enjoyed being able to use that Russian whenever we get a chance to meet somebody who speaks the Russian language. But that was a very important part of it. And he had to learn to speak Russian, but he's an engineer, so it was very difficult for him.
That is absolutely incredible. And if you next time you talk to your husband, tell him that we say "Здравствуйте." Я понимаю по-русски мало словом, so I speak a little bit as well. But so the kids want to know before we let you go, is there any advice that you could have to these, that you could impose or give to these kids as they kind of go off into the world, whether they want to pursue space or astrophysics or, you know, be a physician, whatever it may be? What kind of advice would you give to them as they go off into the world and figure out what they want to do?
Well, I think to begin with, you have to have a passion for something. You have to persevere in that passion, and you have to see a purpose in it. And those are the things that I think have helped me figure out things in my life, which direction I wanted to go. And it's held me in great stead to have a passion, a purpose, and persevere.